We, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to prevent future generations from the scourges of war, which twice in our lifetime have brought untold sorrow to mankind, and to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, in the equal rights of men and women, and of all nations large and small, and to establish conditions under which justice and respect for international law can be maintained, and to promote social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom, and for these ends to practice tolerance, and live in peace with one another as good neighbors, and to unite our strength to maintain international peace and security, and to ensure that armed force shall not be used save common interests, and to employ international machinery for the protection of the economic and social advancement of all peoples. We have resolved to combine our efforts to accomplish these aims. Accordingly, our respective governments, through representatives assembled in the city of San Francisco, have agreed to the present Charter of the United Nations and do hereby establish an international organization to be known as the United Nations. This excerpt from the preamble of the United Nations Charter explains the context and mission of the United Nations, which more than 50 nations agreed upon at the United Nations Conference on International Organization in 1945, the year that World War II ended. On October 24th of the same year, the United Nations officially came into force, marking the beginning of a new era based on the peaceful, diplomatic exchange of ideas between nations of all shapes and sizes. The organization was instituted in response to the atrocities encountered during World War II. To war, the world said never again, and committed to cooperate to prevent it at all costs. Harry S. Truman, the President of the United States at the time, spoke with immense power and conviction at the convention.
There were many who doubted that agreement could ever be reached by these 50 countries, differing so much in race and religion, language and culture. But these differences were all forgotten in one unshakable unity of determination to find a way to end war.
At the conference, it was agreed upon that this new peacemaking body would consist of four main sections: the Security Council, the General Assembly, the Secretary General, and the Statute of the International Court of Justice. The 5 permanent members of the Security Council included China, France, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and the United States, since these countries emerged as the largest powers after World War II. Since its creation, the United Nations has often been called upon to prevent disputes from escalating into war, or to help restore peace when armed conflict is encountered, and to promote lasting peace in societies emerging from wars. In more contemporary times, the organization has expanded its mission to provide aid to broader global concerns such as human rights, health, childcare, gender equality, education, climate change, and most recently, terrorism.
Beginning in the 20th century, the United Nations has served as a forum for the peaceful exchange of ideas and diplomacy across borders in the realms of peace and security, economic development, social development, human rights, environment, international law, humanitarian affairs, and health. One of the first successful products of this peaceful exchange was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, created by the United Nations Human Rights Commission, under the chairmanship of Eleanor Roosevelt. The Declaration is a milestone document in the history of human rights, drafted by representatives with different legal and cultural backgrounds from all regions of the world. The Declaration was proclaimed by the United Nations General Assembly in Paris on December 10, 1948, as a common standard of achievements for all peoples and all nations. It set out for the first time fundamental human rights to be universally protected.
Today, at the threshold of a great event, both in the life of the United Nations and in the life of mankind, this Universal Declaration of Human Rights may well become the international Magna Carta of all men everywhere.
The rights protected under the document include the right to life and liberty, equal protection under the law, public hearings for crimes, property ownership, and the freedom of movement, nationality, religion, and expression, just to name a few. Following this historic act, the Assembly called upon all member countries to publicize the text of the Declaration and to cause it to be disseminated, displayed, read, and expounded principally in schools and other educational institutions without distinction based on the political status of countries or territories. According to the Guinness Book of World Records, it is the most translated document in the world.
Since the end of the Cold War, the United Nations has become increasingly involved in providing humanitarian assistance and promoting improvements in the health of the world's peoples. Perhaps the most important product of the UN's collaborative exchange is the United Nations Development Program, which is the UN's global development network that focuses on the challenges of democratic governance, poverty reduction, crisis prevention, and recovery, energy and environment, and HIV and AIDS. It also coordinates national and international efforts to achieve the Millennium Development Goals aimed at poverty reduction. In addition to providing relief for humanitarian causes caused by international conflicts, the United Nations has also responded to emergencies caused by natural disasters such as floods and hurricanes. On a proactive level, the World Health Organization, a United Nations affiliated group, has eliminated smallpox and are actively pursuing a battle against AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria around the world. The United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, known as UNICEF, has saved the lives of over 3 million children a year through immunization programs for polio, tetanus, measles, and whooping cough. The UN Environmental Program acts as a catalyst, advocate, educator, and facilitator to promote the wise use and sustainable development of the global environment. Recently, the UN has been working diligently to work with countries to cut carbon emissions on a global scale by this year, which is the focus of the upcoming 2015 United Nations Climate Change Conference. Therefore, the United Nations effectively acted as a gateway to peaceful exchange amongst nations by improving the lives of all human beings everywhere.
Since its creation, the United Nations has been under intense scrutiny, for many argue that the organization does not have the strength, means, or motivation to effectively intervene in conflicts and make peace.
The problem often is when the UN Security Council passes a resolution setting the parameters for what a peacekeeping mission can do, that it's vague or too limiting. And they can't do the job.
One conflict the United Nations encountered was the Rwandan genocide, which began in 1994. The atrocities fueled by civil war in Rwanda tested the UN's ability to resolve tragic issues amongst peoples, a test the organization seemed to have failed. The UN Security Council has explicitly accepted responsibility for failing to prevent the genocide in Rwanda, in which an estimated 800,000 people were killed. In the first formal response to a report critical of the UN's role, Council members acknowledged its main finding that their governments lacked the political will to stop the massacres. In 2005, the General Assembly created the Outreach Program on the Rwanda Genocide and the United Nations, which focuses on learning the lessons of the Rwanda genocide in order to help prevent similar acts in the future. Current Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said in his message for the 21st commemoration of the Rwanda genocide that took place this year, "On this day, I appeal to the international community to do more than just speak about atrocity crimes and then fail to take timely action to prevent them. I call on all to summon the courage to act before situations deteriorate based on our collective moral responsibility. This is critical for the maintenance of international peace and security." Although the United Nations encountered failure and was unable to settle these conflicts, they served as a learning experience that has since made this organization stronger.
The formation and evolution of the United Nations as a peacekeeping body has ultimately improved the quality of life for millions of people, while uniting the world as an active agent of change. Even though the UN has encountered failure, it can be accredited for making the world a much better place than it was in 1945. If it were not for the world's willingness to settle the conflicts it encountered in a peaceful manner, we would be living in a dark world without the peaceful exchange of ideas and perspectives, unaware of the true necessity of diplomacy and fraternity to the sustenance of the human race. As President Franklin D. Roosevelt said, "We shall have to take the responsibility for world collaboration, or we shall have to bear the responsibility for another world's conflict. No one can say how long any plan will last. Peace can endure only as long as humanity really insists upon it and is willing to work for it and sacrifice for it.